Today's presentation is going to be on the independent, otherwise I refer to it as the indie voters movement, how electoral reform can transform American politics. My name is Jarrell Corley. A little bit about myself. I've been an independent voting rights activist for the past 10 years. I got started with this work with an organization called independentvoting.org out of New York City, and I've been working with them ever since as a hobby. While working with them, I was also introduced to another organization out of New York called Open Primaries. I now currently am the national spokesperson for Open Primaries. I've published a few articles recently in the Chicago Sun-Times, Blavity, and I've also been featured on Yahoo News. What is the Indie Voters Movement? The Independent Voters Movement is a growing movement for American electoral reform. This movement consists of Americans from all creeds, colors, and political beliefs. Indie voters may believe in a different set of values, but they share one common belief. That belief is America's government is ineffective at addressing the problems of the day. Independents believe this ineffectiveness is a result of an unfair voting system that prioritizes the needs of the political parties over the American people. The Independent Voters Movement aims to solve this issue with various types of electoral reforms, so our government reflects the notion that it is for the people and by the people. A couple of quick statistics. The independents are the largest growing demographic of voters in this country today. However, that's not really talked about too much in the mainstream media, but according to the most recent Gallup poll, which I believe was conducted sometime last year, it was taken on party affiliation. 43% of Americans that qualify to vote in this country identify as independent. And that's one of the biggest hitters of the independent voters movement, is that if nearly half of the country identifies as independent, why is our voting system set up in such a way where you have to register to one of the two major parties to vote in one of the most important elections, which is actually the primary election? 90% of American elections are determined in the primary election. So when you first, I know most of you know this is basic politics. When the first election is the primary, and that's when all the candidates go, and then they just sort of duke it out until the candidates from each party are going to represent the party. And so 9 times out of 10, whoever wins the primary is more than likely going to win the general election. And that's because of gerrymandered districts for the most part in our local elections. It's a little different for the presidential election, of course, because you have to get those last two to fight to win the general. 60% of the American electorate votes in the presidential election. From some research that I've done, America has the lowest voter turnout amongst the developed democracies in the world. And we ask, why is that? I thought we were the leader in democracy. Why is that? I tend to believe that the reason we do that, the reason that we have such low turnout, is because of the way our system is set up. And we've reached a point where the situation is just bad, and there's no denying that. Even though our politicians lie about everything, the people cannot deny that the situation is bad and it's not getting any better. So I think that there's just this overall climate of apathy amongst the American electorate, and I think that's why voter turnout is so low, because they don't believe the system is effective in addressing the problems of today. Furthermore, only 40% of the American electorate vote in the midterm elections. And I don't think people realize that, hey, everyone thinks that the president is like a king, that he can just get things done. But what they don't realize is that we don't live in a monarchy. We live in a democracy. We live in a republic that we refer to as a democracy. And the president needs the assistance of Congress in order to get his agenda passed. But most people fail to realize this, and that's another reason probably why voter turnout is so low in the midterm election. And this also plays back into that earlier statistic about 90% of elections are determined in the primary election. I think that statistic speaks primarily to state and local elections, where oftentimes our elections are, the districts are drawn in such a manner where they're either heavily blue or heavy red. And that leads to a very uncompetitive election system where smaller candidates who don't necessarily have party endorsement or who are lesser known, or third party candidates, don't even stand a chance. So what incentive do the legislators who are running for office have to offer ideas rather than just talking points and sound bites that ultimately really are only just dividing people versus actually bringing them together to solve the issues? The problem, I spoke on this earlier. The main problem right now is that we have uncompetitive primary elections. Currently, right now, the majority of the elections in this country are closed primaries. So what are closed primaries? Closed primaries require you to register with one of the two major parties in order to vote in that primary election. So it basically constricts you to who you can vote for. And these primary elections also attract the most ideological voters from both sides of the spectrum. I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. Like I said earlier, from this earlier statistic, only 40% of American electorates vote. Well, that's the midterm. That's not really the primary, so I won't get into that too much. But a lot of voters don't vote in the primaries. And so oftentimes what you'll notice during the election cycle is that the language of the candidates is much more extreme during the primaries than it is once it moves closer and closer to the general. And that's because the reason why their language gets less and less extreme as the campaign cycle moves forward is because they're trying to attract a larger net of voters. So if you know that a small percentage of the voters are going to vote in the primary, you're going to gear your message towards those voters to get their support so you can win the primary and almost be guaranteed a win in that general election. So that's why candidates have the most extreme rhetoric. Third party or moderate candidates don't stand a chance. If many of you don't know this, independent and third party candidates have to collect a substantial amount more signatures to get on the ballot than the Democrats or Republicans. That's just another way that the system is set up to give the parties an advantage. And in our current system that we vote in, people are voting for a party, not the candidate. Our current system does not really encourage ideas. It's more so the party's way or the highway. And I think a lot of people can connect with that because they know that there really are no more free thinkers in Congress. They're just saying the same old thing that the party bosses, want them to say if they are to advance in their career versus trying to genuinely represent the people that elected them there in the first place. So when you have these closed primary systems and you make people choose a party to vote for, it limits who they can vote for. And then if the system is set up in such a way where candidates are encouraged to base their message off who they think is going to vote for them, that's how they win. And then ultimately, when the general election comes around, you don't really have a real choice. You're just voting for kind of who the party backed and things of that nature. It's an unrepresentative government. The way our system is set up, it does not incentivize politicians to be solutions oriented. A lot of people are talking about special interest groups. We know about money in politics. A politician, that's their job. So people are naturally going to do what they have to do to keep their job. But unfortunately, the politicians are more aligned with the special interests who fund their campaigns and the party interests who basically control the course of their career, because that's how they determine what committees they sit on and what type of power they yield and who in the party can get behind them to pass legislation, it's all determined on how well you can work with the Washington insiders versus how well you represent the voters. Points of view are not represented. Oftentimes, I'm pretty sure, the world is very corruptible. Earlier, one woman made a statement about, having values and practicing abstinence. That's the way you can solve abortion. I mean, you can agree or disagree with that statement, but the world, I think that brings up a great point to the fact that the world is a very corruptible place. So we know that the world is very corruptible. And so these politicians, free thinking is not encouraged because the world is corrupted. So a lot of times you may have these candidates that have these ideals that want to genuinely fix the issues in the world, but they find out that once they get to Washington, that's not the case. You can't do that because they're corruptible. And you're not able to actually represent the views of people so much, like maybe the majority of people, just what is going to get traction and get immediate attention. And so I think that the views that are presented in the media probably are only the views of a small majority of people that are actually in the country. And that's because they're trying to rile up those extreme ends in order to just keep that separation going. Because how often are people from opposite ends of the spectrum having conversations about what they think and maybe learning from one another and changing their views? They're not, because they think that the other side is all like what they see on the media, which is not true. It's very biased. Unresponsive government. Currently the American government is bloated. It's just overly bureaucratic, and it's just lethargic, and it's unresponsive to the problems that we see in modern day society. And I think that this system just encourages that. It's almost as if it's self-defeating, as if there's more of an incentive to not get anything changed than there is to actually change it. And I just don't find that acceptable. I think that America can do a lot better. And I think that these electoral reforms will incentivize our politicians to do a lot better. And there have been cases where this has been the case. I'm not going to get into too many specifics about that, but there have been recent developments in this country where open primaries have been enacted to different state legislatures and even some of the federal elections, most recently with Maine. Even in California, they've seen that some of the issues have been solved, because of open primaries, but they still have a lot of issues to move forward that they need to fix as well, because as we all know, there's a lot of, messiness going on in California right now. Gerrymandering, that's another process by which we disenfranchise voters. So the lines are drawn in party favors. A lot of the districts we live in are either heavily blue or heavily red, and that limits competition. And if a district is drawn in such a way where the majority of voters are registered Republicans, there's no chance that a Democrat has an opportunity to win in that district. And the same thing goes for a mainly blue district as well. And even though you may have more candidates of the same party running, that candidate that has that familiar face, that has that popularity, he's going to win. And when he wins the primary election, he's going off to the general election unopposed. And he's automatically won. So why are we stopping the process halfway through? If there's 2 steps to the process, you should be fighting to the very end. Our current system doesn't work that way. And finally, I already talked about, the ineffective government. But lastly, our government is ineffective because it's always at a constant stalemate. And that's because it's based on finger pointing and the blame game. And there's no incentive for the politicians to work together, because it's more of an incentive for them to work against one another, because that's just the way our political culture is set up right now. And electoral reform will hopefully make elections much more competitive therefore changing the behavior of the politicians to do the right thing, because now they're more accountable to the people because there's more competition. The solution. Open primaries is the solution. But I also think that it should be a combination of both open primaries and another mechanism known as ranked choice voting. So what are open primaries? Open primaries basically would open up the primaries and allow all voters to vote in an election, regardless of party affiliation or non-party affiliation. It would also allow for all the candidates to be on one ballot. So basically, just a free-for-all. All the candidates are on one ballot. Everyone votes for who they want to vote for. And the top two go to the next, to the general, and they have a face-off from there to win for the general election. This is good because it actually gives the people a choice, and they don't have to choose which party they want to vote for. Furthermore, elections are taxpayer funded. So why is it that if you don't choose a party or if you belong to a third party, you can't participate in an election that you pay for? That's not right. That's almost like taxation without representation, and it's not very democratic if you ask me. Ranked choice voting is another concept which I think creates more choice for actual voters. And I think it also gives more power to third-party candidates who voters often overlook because they believe they won't be able to win. So a combination of these two reforms, I think, is the best method to allow voters. So with ranked choice voting, let's just say you have, 10 different candidates that are running. On a ranked choice voting ballot, you would be able to rank your top 5 candidates. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, and in this situation, if in the primary, if one candidate did not receive 50% or more of the vote, there's going to be an instant runoff. And after that instant runoff, the candidate that receives the least amount of votes will be knocked out of the race. And that instant runoff keeps occurring until one candidate receives 50% or more of the vote. And for each runoff, the candidate in each next level, they would get knocked out of the race if they get the lowest amount of votes. And that process continues until one candidate receives 50% or more of the vote. I think this, opens up choice. It allows people to dive more into the issues on what the candidates believe in. It obviously creates much more competition. I think it makes candidates much more ideas oriented versus problem oriented. And I think that it will cut back in the finger pointing and the blame game and the polarization that's caused by the defamation of character and all of the personal attacks and just the mudslinging and the nastiness that we all know politics creates. So I think that that's a great thing. I think it'll also allow voters to be more comfortable voting for that lesser known candidate that they actually believe in, because there might be a chance for them to make it to the top because this system allows for that. District lines are also irrelevant because it's a proportional vote. If everyone in that area is allowed to vote, despite their party differences, and they rank their candidates, district lines no longer remain relevant because it's all about the percentage of the votes that you get, not just the small amount of the voters that voted in that majority red or blue district. We're pretty much wrapping it up now. This is just some things that I came up with personally. Independent symbology. For me, the color purple basically represents a meshing of the Democrats and Republicans, red and blue. When you combine red and blue, that makes purple. So I think that, me personally, I like the color purple for that reason, to represent the independents, because I think that, at least from my perspective, I share, some thoughts of both the parties. That's not to say that all independents are centrist. It's just to say that, I think that when you bring the entire political system together, red and blue, you get purple. The color yellow is basically just the symbol of change. Independents represent change, and we want to actually change the way we elect our government officials so we can hopefully change some of the problems that are in government. And, the Republicans have the elephants and the Democrats have the donkey. So the independents just have the people. The man is gray by default. I couldn't find a purple man, so that's just where that stands. But I think that since the independents are really focused on the individual voters versus the party, our symbol should just be a person. And here's some other important websites. Like I said, I've been involved with this movement for the past 10 years. When I first got involved 10 years ago in Florida, it was I'll get to your question in 1 minute. It was a very lonely place. Although we had the network out in New York as a central hub, I really was not familiar with a lot of other organizations and statewide movements that were occurring to change these types of reforms. And you look up, they're everywhere now. You have different reform initiatives in different states across the country. I feel like every 6 months or so, like every election season or so, a new ballot initiative is on the ballot. And in some instances they're losing, and some they're winning. These are some of the other important websites. Independentvoters.org, that was the first organization I was involved with. Open Primaries, that's another one. That's based out of New York as well. Veterans for Political Innovation, they are working on electoral reform. However, their primary focus is working with veterans, and they're in Ohio. And one quick note, a few other notes about these first two organizations. Independent Voters, they're more so of a network for people to come together and get training on how to be a spokesperson. And they have different guests to talk about different topics and things of that nature. They're not really involved in changing the process as much as they are involved in just connecting people and putting people together and just talking about the actual issue. Open Primaries, they're working to open the primaries from closed primaries. That's their main philosophy. Veterans for Political Innovation, they are focused on open primaries with the additional ranked choice voting reform as well. The Fair Vote, they're also about ranked choice voting and some other type of reforms such as star voting, which I really don't know too much about. The Institute for Political Innovation, I just recently met them about a month or so ago. I think their main focus is doing research and reconnaissance to determine which states they want to create new ballot initiatives in. I know that they were one of the main forces behind Veterans for Political Innovation, if I'm correct. I met with their founder a few months ago in Ohio. We had lunch, and that's what I gathered from him, that he was able to get some of his funding and his jump start from this organization right here. And finally, you have the Independent Voters Network. They are an advocate for ranked choice voting. You should check out their website. They have a lot of good information out there on these subjects. Finally, my social media, you can just look me up on Facebook, Jarrell Corley, LinkedIn, also my name, Instagram, also my name. And I also have a YouTube channel. My YouTube channel basically has me interviewing different people I find of interest. I've interviewed people from the independent voters movement. I'm looking at some of my upcoming interviews. I'm looking to interview a Republican candidate from Chicago, actually, who's running for the 1st Illinois Congressional District. He is in Chicago. I'm looking to interview him in the upcoming weeks. I'm also trying to get a couple of the Democratic candidates on my channel as well. And from time to time, I may just share my personal views or just give people an update on what's going on the ground with the actual independent movement. And that pretty much wraps up my presentation for the day. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And now we will refer it to you with the questions. So I think Bob raised his hand first. Thanks for the spirit fingers. I see him. And then we'll get to Lewis after we answer Bob. So I think I just clicked this hand, right?